Okay, welcome back, everybody, to the Workplace Wanderer. Another exciting week, and I'm grateful to have my guest Brian Cuban on this week to discuss an important topic that is actually near and dear to my heart, as my wife is an attorney and my father's an attorney, and I see the effects of the law field on their mental health, and I've watched it as I grew up with my father. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Blake, thanks for having me on.
So there's a lot to unpack here. Obviously, this is a field that has a lot of catching up to do in terms of modernization and including mental health and bringing humanity into the field. Am I right in saying that?
Sure. As far as a broad picture, I think you're right. There are a lot of micro issues that certainly need to be addressed in how we practice law, what the culture around drinking is, although that is changing, the law school culture. And so, I mean, it starts, the journey starts before law school. It starts in college. And what were your views on, or it could even go back even further.
Yeah.
Lawyers have trauma like anyone else. Lawyers get bullied or whatever in high school. Lawyers may have drinking struggles in college. And there is a continuum for many. And well, there are those lawyers that are just pure trigger, right? I don't want to say cause and effect, but the pure trigger is stress. They weren't a heavy drinker, maybe had it, but drinks put them over the substance use disorder line into substance use disorder.
Sure, yeah.
And alcohol use disorder. But anecdotally, in my experience, it's usually much more complicated than that.
Yeah, and it always is. And I'm sure it's exacerbated by a lot of the pressures, especially early on in the field. And as you progress through your career in law, I'm sure those pressures change.
Sure. I mean, there's a normative level. I mean, there may be what we call a normative level of a couple drinks, right, during the week or whatever. But from that standpoint, the stress and all the things that go on with practicing law, the social isolation, especially if you're a solo or small firm, the pressures of big law billing, that's another conversation in itself. The structure of big law billing, and for people who don't know, big law is really big law firms. Kind of called the AM law.
Huh? Okay. The billboard commercial firms that we see.
No. Those are really usually the ones you don't see. The AM law, the very big law firms. You see in, I want to say maybe over 200, but I could be wrong about that. 200 above would be considered big law. I could ask my wife. She's in her room. She's a legal recruiter. But
there.
Yeah, those pressures can certainly tip someone over from a normative level of just social drinking to alcohol use disorder, maybe a low level, right? And then it just becomes cumulative: moderate alcohol use disorder, severe alcohol use disorder. Of course, we could use the label alcoholic, which is a self-label we give, and it can be a very helpful label for some people, especially if you're going these abstinence route in AA, because that could be the label that says, okay, I am this, I need to do this, right?
Right.
Walk into the room. But we know the diagnosis is alcohol use disorder. And so on the audit scale, you may be on a continuum. And so the stresses can definitely move you from not on that continuum onto it and keep rising to the point where it is a huge problem.
I definitely want to jump into this more, and I'm thinking of it in terms of organizational culture and the effects it has, or maybe the lack of prevention methods within the culture of the law field that don't necessarily allow a person the opportunity to learn about positive ways to cope with stress of work, and maybe have the support at work or within their law firms.
Okay. Well, we have to break it out. One, the pressures in, say, for a solo or a small firm, and the organizational structure and what they have disposed to them, or what they're aware of, okay, are going to be different than maybe even in a middle-sized firm, 100 to 150, to big law, 200 or so, 250, 300 lawyers, 400 lawyers, where those law firms are going to tend to have more more backstops in place. Mm-hmm. Okay, where they have it's in their employment manual. Here is how we deal with that. Here's who you call. It's anonymous. Boom, boom, boom. But if you draw it back to say the solo in his or her office, or maybe even working out of their house,
right?
They have very little interaction with people unless it's, say, in the courtroom. Okay, right. So they don't have that kind of support. So we would have to talk about it in different tranches.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And this brings me to you a little bit. And I know that you've done, just based off what I've seen on LinkedIn, you do a lot of presentations for various bar associations around the country. So I imagine that is a helpful tool for a lot of these solo practitioners who maybe can be involved in some of those bar association talks or events where they can actually gain access to some of this information and understand that they need to watch out for certain concerns.
Sure, and that may be the sole way, and other than, say, bulletin boards. A lot of solos use bulletin boards online for people in the solo profession where there's some support. But that may be their primary way of ingesting it, as well as ingesting the information, as well as every state has a lawyer's assistance program. Okay, in Texas, it's called TLAP, the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program. I was on the advisory committee for a while, but in Pennsylvania, it's called Lawyers Helping Lawyers. Yeah, and so, but it's the goal is the same, to be there and have a resource for lawyers to reach out to confidentially to get help. Now, do lawyers always take advantage of that? No, because there's a stigma around the lawyers' assistance programs to some degree, because like in the medical profession or any licensed profession, lawyers can get very stressed when they're struggling about how is this going to affect we call it our ticket, right? How is this going to affect my ticket? If I lose my ticket, I lose my house.
Right.
If I lose my ticket, I may lose my marriage will fall apart. I can't support myself in the lifestyle to which I've been accustomed. So how can I not risk losing my ticket by dealing with this on my own? And we're a profession of thinkers, right? If you look at the Myers-Briggs, about 90% of all lawyers fall into the thinker category. I happen to be in the feeler category, only 5%.
Right. Wow.
And feelers can survive in the legal profession. They just tend to go into different aspects.
Okay. So let's back up a little bit. And at what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to go to law school? What motivated that? Were there lawyers in the family?
That's a great question. My motivations for law school were odd. Okay. I went to Penn State University, and I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a cop. That would have worked out well.
Yeah.
I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the baby laxative for the blow.
It would have been a very different life for you.
Yes. It would have been a short-lived life because I never would have survived it.
Yeah.
Whether I'd have been, busted or this or that, there'd be a Netflix special on it. But I was also at that point in severe alcohol use disorder. Again, alcoholic. I'll put it in air quotes because it's not a diagnosis. And already in college, I was drinking almost every night alone in my dorm or apartment. I was going to class drunk. I was going to class hungover. I would go into at Penn State, we had a row of bars, and you got in through these bars through the alley on the main drag. I would go to the liquor store in Pennsylvania and back then we had what were called state cards with your picture on them, because we didn't have picture driver's license back in my day. I'm a boomer. And so I turned 21 and I'd buy these little bottles of tequila and I'd wear cowboy boots and I'd put it in a cowboy boot and I'd go into the alley and I'd chug the tequila, get drunk so I could go up in the bar hoping that would put me in the right state of mind to meet a girl or talk, because I was brutally shy. Had never kissed a girl, hadn't had a girlfriend. And
so looking for some liquid courage.
Looking for the liquid courage and looking to feel differently about myself, right? Okay. Which is often the case, trying to change how I felt about myself. Mm-hmm. But what ultimately happened every single time, it really was cause effect. I'd go up to the bar, I'd sit there alone, get drunker, and And then I'd just leave and I would cry, and I would just go and I would cry. I would go back to my dorm and just cry. I just felt so alone and so lonely. But then the next time but it was the only way I knew how to function.
Yeah.
So it was my kind of like, if you've ever seen Snoopy and Linus, right? He had his little whoopee security blanket, right?
Right.
That was my security blanket, the drinking and other things. I was also bulimic. I had an eating disorder. And so, but these were the things that helped me survive. And so one day I'm sitting in the placement office at Penn State and looking through cop jobs. This is before the internet. They got pamphlets, and you're looking through cities, Dallas or whatever, and they were always down south advertising for police officers. Come on down, and they'd come recruit at the colleges. And so I'm looking through, and there are two guys sitting next to me from Pittsburgh. I knew them in my major. Pittsburgh's where I'm from, born and raised.
Yeah.
And they're talking about going to the University of Pittsburgh Law School, applying, hoping they get in there. So I start listening, and I'm going like this, listening to them. And the bells start going off in my head. Not the bells of I want to be a lawyer, not the bells of I want to emulate Clarence Darrow or emulate Atticus Finch or be the next Clarence Darrow. The bells of law school's 3 years. I can go to law school, and for another 3 years, I can survive in exactly the same way I've been surviving at Penn State, drinking, binging, and purging. And for those who don't know, about 50% of all those with eating disorders are male. That may surprise a lot of people.
Yeah.
But especially back then, it was very stigmatized. It's stigmatized now for men, but back then, forget it.
It's just very rarely even talked about for men these days. And you're one of the few voices that I hear consistently talking about and discussing this topic for men.
Yeah, even though 50, but only 1 in 10 males will seek treatment. It shows you. Yeah. And so even though I didn't know any lawyers, I had no concept of what it meant to be a lawyer beyond whatever shows I was watching at the time. There were no lawyers in my family, didn't know any. I decided for those reasons that I could stay in school and hide for 3 more years and drink and binge and purge and do all the things that allowed me to survive step by step, by the tip of my nose at Penn State. It made perfect sense to me. Perfect sense. So
it was almost a way of keeping the party going, even though it didn't sound like it was very fun anymore, but it was.
I didn't look at it as a party. I look at it as, how am I going to survive in the real world?
Okay, so it was avoiding the adult responsibilities. If I could say,
it was avoiding having to fix myself to get out there.
Okay.
Believe me, I didn't look at it as a party. Every night might have had some hope that this will be the night where I can get smashed and actually meet a girl or be someone different, right?
Sure.
But in Penn State, criminal justice was a very easy major. And I also had the ability to pull it together for a night, study, give back the information the next day. So I had decent grades despite being an alcoholic.
Which almost perpetuates the problem sometimes, because you can prove that I could stop for a day and I can still function in one area of my life, which means my life's not a total failure.
And this was the early 80s, where we weren't really talking about residential treatment. There was no awareness. There were no student groups. Unless you ran into someone who was in 12-step, right, and they knew you had a problem, there was no support whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so it's funny. I walked into one day it was a White Castle or something. I forget. On the Penn State campus, drunk, of course. And I'm waiting for my order, and I'd see a rack of pamphlets. And I don't know if they still do it. The 12-step groups, the 20 questions. I don't know if they still put out those pamphlets on colleges. But it was geared towards college students. It's, do you pass out? Do you miss class? And check off, and and the number, call us, right? Kind of
typically in the counseling centers now.
Okay.
Yes.
And but they were everywhere. They were in the hamburger joints, and they were everywhere. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm checking off all the yeses. And I'm just a college student. We're all like this, And 2 points, my tryout for the Mavs, right in the basket. That was really as close as I ever came to any kind of epiphany that maybe there's a problem. But I got into Pitt Law. I did well enough on the LSATs to get into Pitt Law, and I walked through the doors of the University of Pittsburgh School of Law fall of 1983 as an alcoholic, dealing with an eating disorder and totally unprepared for what lay ahead, because unlike college, you have to actually study in law school to do well.
Yeah.
You can't drink, binge and purge. And I had also developed exercise bulimia. And what that is was obsessive compulsive. What that is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. And so I was running 10 miles a day, up to 20 miles a day. And this was all my way of isolating, right? I remember I felt so alone at Penn State, just so, girls hate me. No one wants to be with me. I had a difficult relationship with my mom. Not that any of this is her fault, right?
Sure.
Parents don't cause addiction. Parents don't cause eating disorders. Cause and correlation are two separate things. So what I would do, Blake, was during football games, because I didn't want to look in the faces, everyone, the Penn State Nittany Lions, everyone would be walking to the stadium, thousands and thousands of kids. And I didn't want to have to look in the faces of all these people who I thought were having fun. They had their girlfriends, they had their buddies, and I had no one.
Right.
Because it was just a reflection of the mirror.
Yeah.
And so I would go out for these 10-mile runs, 15-mile runs, 20-mile runs, and wouldn't return until the game was over, even if I had to walk. That was my way of avoiding things. And so I was dealing with that as well when I walked into through the doors of Pitt Law.
I mean, it's a whole nother story. I can't even imagine how you balanced all of that with law school. I mean, watching my wife do it, I just couldn't even imagine how you could.
The answer is I didn't. I mean, here's law review. We go to the bottom below the R screen, and that's where I graduated by the skin of my teeth.
You still got through somehow. That's still impressive.
It was funny. At graduation, I was so apathetic and didn't care. I didn't even go. Just mail it to me. Yeah. But it all came back around in 2021. I gave the commencement speech for this law school, and I wore the cap and gown for the first time.
Wow. A full circle moment. Those are the best. And those are those opportunities that recovery gives us that we never would have realized how special those moments are, right. those full circle moments. But when they come, I remember at my wedding, which is obviously many people go through their wedding, but it was the walking down the aisle and seeing all of the people that I had hurt, my family, my friends, the people that were this close to turning their backs on me because of the damage I was doing. And I'm seeing everyone, and then also all the people that I've met and the life I've built in recovery, everyone turning around and smiling at me. And I just started bawling, crying because I'm a baby. But it's those full circle moments that are the biggest blessings in recovery.
Yeah, and it was great because I did cry because I had about 5 years ago, I had seeded the Pitt Law Student Wellness Fund, okay, for money. So students who are struggling with mental health issues or whatever, there's a fund to get them some help, counseling or whatever, because law school budgets, and especially 5 years ago, law school budgets are tight. There was generally, we can talk about that, that's changed a bit, but there was generally very few resources, right? So I go up to the podium, and this is right, we're all math, this is right in the middle of the pandemic. And they announced that they had named the law school fund the Brian Cuban Wellness Fund. Oh and so it went from my little seed to now there's $40,000 or $50,000 in it. So people have seen the need.
What an amazing contribution!
Yeah,
that's incredible.
That was nice. That was nice to see it actually in action. Something that I put some money in, and I thought, okay, it'll get depleted, and every time it got depleted, I put a little bit more in. Yeah, I'm not wealthy. It was just a little bit, and then it just took off.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it speaks to the need. People obviously see that there's a need there for this type of fund, and I imagine that's why it's taking off. I mean,
yes, and in law school, it's been there's a lot more awareness now than there was when I was in law school. When I was at Pitt Law, we brought, once a month on Friday, we'd bring in a DJ and we'd bring in the booze and the beer keg, and we'd have hard alcohol ragers in the student lounge. That doesn't happen today.
No, that would never happen.
We're not drinking on the law school premises. Now, the law school can't stop students from going out and drinking, right? Having events. And you don't want to. You want to stress balance.
Yeah.
You want to stress that doesn't have to be the focus of every event. Because we have to remember, Blake, whether we're in whether we're in law school, whether we're in a law firm, whether we're in an accounting firm. This is not a world of alcoholics, of people with substance use disorder. We're in the minority.
Yeah.
Okay, so we shouldn't be dictating the majority.
Yeah. And I think that's where
I'm careful about that because it can cause hard feelings and conflict.
No, and I agree with that completely. And we can't assume or accuse everybody who drinks, even problematically, that they have a problem with alcohol. It just may be situational. There's so many factors that play.
Exactly.
But this is why I like to discuss even substance use disorders. I like to not separate it from the concept of general mental health, because I think we all, many of us, I'm not going to say we all, but many of us become accustomed to learning to find ways to cope with stress in negative ways.
Absolutely.
We develop these maladaptive coping mechanisms that end up contributing to a decline in our mental health.
Absolutely. But it's also a very nuanced issue, because if someone, has a bad day and they have a drink, that may not necessarily be an unhealthy way of coping with stress, right?
No.
Now, if it progresses to 2 drinks, to 3 drinks, to 4 drinks without a backstop or without looking at the bigger picture, yes. And that's why it's important to have the backstops, right? What's the support system to say, okay, I've seen this. I'm not judging that. I'm saying I've seen this.
Right.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, no, I agree. When it becomes that habitual stimulus response, emotion, drink, then it becomes a bigger issue. But if it's, if you're using certain things to cope because that's what you have at your fingertips, or it's just what you need right now.
And for lawyers, that can be a huge problem. I mean, there have been 2 studies over the last 6 years. The one was put out by the American Bar Association in the Hazleton, I forget if it's Betty Ford Hazleton or Hazleton Betty Ford Clinic, that found, that was about 6 years ago, huge study, found that lawyers struggle with alcohol use disorder at a rate over twice the general public. I think it was about 21%.
Okay.
Now, in the female demographic of the profession, it's even higher. The millennial demographic, and I'm using millennial as a catch-all because I don't know I forget what the age range is. And remember, that was 6 years ago, was over 30%. And female millennials were close to 40%. That's a profession in crisis, at least at that point, right? Now, when that study came out, there was all kinds of awareness. The ABA started a pledge where all these law firms signed on to put all of these structures in place so people have healthy outlets where people can, they're doing all these different things. If they need counseling, where can they go? Can they report it anonymously to the firm? Does the law firm have the structures in place? Does the law firm have a point person in place? Now, and it wasn't just law firms, it was corporations, government entities. So that was a good start. Now, I talk to lawyers all the time who say, yeah, that's great what they have in writing, but what's going on in practice on the ground really isn't, it's talk the talk. And that's it. We can, parse that out all day. Right. But we did see that jump. We did see the jump in awareness. But then the pandemic came. And everyone started working from home. And what did we just talk about? What's the turn to? The turn to? Where someone may have moved away from turning to that, all of a sudden they're back to turning to that. Or maybe it was just a couple drinks in the evening and now it's a couple drinks during the day. Right? So that proved to be a problem. And we saw it anecdotally, but it was confirmed in a study with the DC bar by a guy named Patrick Krill, brilliant guy in the field, a study from the DC bar in the California bar, which found that things things took a negative turn during the pandemic, especially for women, especially for the female demographic. So I'll be interested to see what comes out of that in the next study.
Why do you think that females are affected at a higher rate than the male?
Different challenges within the firm. Now, I think because the last thing I'm going to do is mansplain female the woman lawyer issues. So I think you should have a woman lawyer on to talk about that.
Sure. And get my wife to come talk to you.
What's that?
Get my wife to come talk.
Yeah. I'm happy to suggest one, but far be it for me to mansplain what's going on there.
Well, and I'm just curious if there was any data or information about it.
There is. And I can say just from anyone can look at it and see and talk to women and see what women talk about on Twitter, females, whatever whether it's whether they're cis, whether it's BIPOC, and whatever the issues are, and see that there are unique challenges. But I don't think I am the right person to outline those challenges.
Sure, that makes sense. And I will say that if there's any female attorneys that are watching this or that see this later on, there's a very supportive group for female attorneys on Facebook called Miss Esquire.
Yes. My wife may be a part of that.
Okay. Yeah. It's my wife has found a ton of support in that area. And yeah, of course, there's different challenges for them and different levels of pressure, as there are with essentially what I'm learning. And as I'm expanding, understanding my own personal biases and privilege as a white Jewish male growing up with privilege, I'm understanding the different biases and issues that a lot of other cultures, races, genders,
absolutely, and that's
a daily basis.
Absolutely, and that can be an issue, and that can be a huge issue in law school, right? Where law schools put in structures that are for the majority. What's the majority here? Or it could be, for Black students, or for Caucasian students, but there are other students of color, right? And
Sure.
from other ethnicities and countries who may have very different views of mental health stigma.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've suggested, and what a lot of law schools do, is you have student mental health committees that pull in from BIPOC, that pull in from, students from different countries, and who all come together to bring their viewpoints on mental health stigma within the law school environment. And a lot of schools do that.
That's great. No, it's great. And it's great to know that these changes are occurring. And although things seem to be getting worse, obviously, in terms of mental health and substance use disorder issues in our country, I'm also, and this may be idealistic thinking for me, but I'm under the impression that we may be just going through a really difficult change process as an entire society. And the hope is at the other end of all of this struggle, we're going to have some developed systems that are going to be more supportive to those who.
That's an interesting viewpoint and a valid one. But for me to respond with any kind of credibility, I would have to look at the history, right, of this country, and because there have been different things that have gone on. And then all through life, World War II and this and that. And if we had the ability at those times to really dig down into the data, we may have seen similar cycles.
Sure.
Right? People drinking and turning to this and that during Prohibition and all of these things. Well, I could argue we're in Prohibition now as well, too. But so it would be difficult to see, to really, I'd have to compare it to the different cycles of history.
I'll just say this: it's an opinion based on feeling what I'm seeing, and I guess also what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, because I may view where we are currently differently than you do, right?
Sure.
Someone who is a liberal will view it differently than someone who is a conservative.
Sure.
And so it would be, we are in a tumultuous time. We can all agree on that. Yeah. And tumultuous times can often trigger mental health issues and substance use issues.
Sure.
But this isn't the only tumultuous time this country has gone through.
No, met very many in our short, young history.
Yes.
Definitely a bunch of them. So obviously you had found recovery. Is it 12 years ago? Am I wrong?
Oh, 16 years and 3 months. I know because I just posted something for Recovery Month.
That's right. And it happened.
But it's funny, people, I'll be speaking and you would think I would know. And I'll go and do a talk and I'll get my recovery date wrong. I don't focus on it. I don't count days and I don't focus on it. But I know it's April 7th, 2007. But it's just weird. I'll be talking and I'll give the wrong date.
What you have to do is make it very easy, like mine, which is New Year's Eve. I never forget 12/31/12. It's very easy to remember. So after finding recovery, obviously there's a steep decline that usually leads us to a rebirth, as some people like to call it, when we find our recovery. At what point in your recovery did you decide to start focusing on a lot of the advocacy work that you're doing?
It was a process. I don't look at it as a rebirth. I try to stay away from, I got sober in 12-step, and and I'll be the first to say it was, it was a very important mutual aid aspect of my life. But there were other important mutual aid aspects of my or peer support. My parents, my father was very important. My wife, my brothers have been important. My cats. So I look at it as a process, not a rebirth. Maybe that's semantics. Maybe because like when I walked into the 12-step for my first day, at the insistence of my psychiatrist, privilege, another aspect of privilege, I had health insurance and was seeing a psychiatrist. And that's another thing. A lot of solo lawyers, believe it or not, don't have health insurance, or they're de facto uninsured because the deductible is so high. There's this, notion that lawyers are all wealthy and can get the best. That's just not true.
Right. Yeah.
But he said residential treatment. He only offered me residential treatment or abstinence-based, in the 12-step room. And this was back in 2007. It was a different time.
Right.
And not that harm reduction was really going to work for me with cocaine. If I go from an 8-ball a week to a gram, I'll be fine. I wasn't going back to that. Now, is that a valid form of harm reduction? Sure. But it wasn't going to work for me.
Right.
So when I walked into the room the first time, I wasn't thinking about alcoholics, substance use disorder, or anything. The thing on my mind was, if sitting in this chair will, for the first time in my life, allow me to walk to the mirror in my bedroom, get up in the morning, walk to the mirror in my bedroom, birthday suit naked, and love who I see, out the aid of alcohol or blow, I'll sit. That was what was driving me.
Wow. Because
I hated myself. I absolutely despised myself. I despised myself. I had, come close to suicide just less than 2 years before, where my brothers had to haul me down to a psychiatric hospital. The first time there were 2 trips to that same place. So, and I just despised myself and only saw a black hole in my future, right? I didn't even see a future. I saw a black hole. So I scaled it back. Let's talk about tomorrow. Yeah. Can I love myself tomorrow? What's the yellow brick or dark brick or whatever brick road to loving myself?
Right.
For right now, it is sitting in this chair.
So
that was the beginning of a process.
Yeah.
I don't look at it as a rebirth. And that process was, it was just a process of self-discovery. And what really tipped it over was my eating disorder, not addiction, not substance use disorder. I hadn't told even my psychiatrist at a point about struggling with bulimia. It was so stigmatized. And my family didn't know, nobody knew. And so I was on the internet and I was reading a story about a Brazilian model by the name of Caroline Reston, who died from complications related to anorexia at a horrifically low weight. And they list her weight. Now they wouldn't do that in an article, but they listed her weight. And I'm looking at the comments back when they allowed comments on these things. Yeah. And, when there weren't when trolling hadn't become a thing yet to a large extent. Mm-hmm. And there were some comments from males. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm not alone. And that prompted me to write a blog about it back in the early days of my blogging, 2007, 2008, that I suffered from bulimia. And that was the beginning of my journey into advocacy. And so it was kind of right and duck. And this was during MySpace. So I put it on MySpace thinking I'm going to get hammered. And there was all the support. I thought, wow, my words have an impact.
Was this, how vulnerable of you, how vulnerable of an experience of putting that out there?
I was horrified, which is why I figured, okay, I'll write it, and then I don't have to worry, if people, that's why I said write and duck, right? Fire and duck. I'll write it, and if there are nasty comments, I can deal with that better than to my face.
Right. Right.
I don't even have to look at the comments, right? But of course,
Right.
you always look at the comments, even those you should never read the comments. But
No.
especially nowadays.
I mean, I'm sure it was very cathartic for you. Then I'm also sure it was very supporting. It's really supported your journey, seeing actually all of that support and love your way for admitting.
But that was the kind of, to use 12-step language, aha moment when my words have impact.
Okay. And so that, like you said, it started your advocacy journey, and then obviously has just, as everything does, you talk about the process of recovery. Well, there's a process or progression of advocacy work. So now it's led you to the point where I see you speaking all over the country. Before we jump to that, though, I'm curious too, was this your first experience writing? Was it that blog? Your first experience writing?
I had been blogging, but it had been what I call angry blogging. Okay. I was very angry, and this was and so I would pick an issue, and I was kind of just being a dick online, roasting people, and I justified it saying this is satire. I tried to do satire, political issues, and I didn't pick sides. I remember I did something on George Bush and Hillary Clinton, calling him a dictator, and Hillary Clinton this, that, and I didn't pick sides. Because I didn't even consider myself all that political. I was just looking for hot buttons.
Right.
So I called it very angry blogging, sort of a side issue of addiction, right? Angry. I was just angry, and that was my release.
Yeah. No. So you had been blogging for a while, and then now it seems as if you've obviously moved into novels. I have The Ambulance Chaser somewhere.
I wrote my two memoirs, Shattered Image, which was about my eating disorders, then The Addicted Lawyer, which was kind of what put me on the map in terms of the legal profession. It got a lot of notice when it came out, got a mention in the New York Times. So that started my journey and made me known for law firms and such like that. But how many times can you tell your own story? Writing has always been something I enjoyed, creativity. So it just seemed like a natural progression. And I kept having the Ambulance Chaser arose out of a reoccurring dream. And it's a very dark dream. It was this reoccurring dream about being a kid in my hometown with one of my buddies. And we're throwing bodies into this bonfire not far from my house at night. And we're just tossing them in. And the bodies have their eyes are open, these 8-ball cracked eyes staring back at me. And so they're not dead or they're zombies. And then all of a sudden the dream fast forwards, and I'm an older guy, middle-aged guy, scared out of my wits because, wow, these bodies are there and I'm going to be arrested. These bodies are about to be found. And of course, I've never murdered anyone, never thrown bodies into a bonfire. But that was the genesis of The Ambulance Chaser, a decades-old crime coming back to the present.
Okay. I mean, it's a great book.
Now, of course, it went through a lot of ideations of that dream, which has nothing to do with throwing bodies into a bonfire, the novel. Right. But, and Pittsburgh being dear to my heart, even I've lived in Dallas, 35, 36 years, but, I still bleed black and gold. And Pittsburgh just has so much. Dallas has its culture, but Pittsburgh just has this hold even when you leave. And so that's why I said it in Pittsburgh. Now I'm just finishing the manuscript for The Body Brokers.
I was going to ask you where you're at because you've been pretty public talking about.
And The Body Brokers is not about cutting out organs. It is about the protagonist from The Ambulance Chaser, whose girlfriend dies of an overdose, trying to getting sucked into the world of shady treatment centers and addiction body brokering, trying to solve her murder.
Oh, wow. Nice way to include multiple aspects.
Yes, and this one takes place in Pittsburgh and in Kensington, Philadelphia.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. The locations make a lot of sense.
Good.
So doing the advocacy work, I'm curious where, when you're giving these presentations, let's say at different bar associations, obviously there's a cautionary tale and telling a bit of your story. What is your main message to the attorneys that you're speaking to? What are you trying to impart onto them?
That you can't think your way out of it. Okay? That kicking the can down the road is the worst possible solution. Okay. Trying to avoid going public. Whether it's going, in law, for a lawyer, going to the confidential lawyer's assistance program may be viewed as going public because they believe they're not confidential. That's a stigma, unfortunately. But I try to give them, I give them my path, obviously. And what I try to impart is two things. One, it is often a cumulative issue, and what happens is what I call the Peter principle of addiction. And this isn't just in law firms; it can be in an accounting firm or in, whatever other business, where as substance use disorder progresses, our ability to provide good work decreases. So if you're a lawyer billing and at top notch, right? It's not impacting you. You're giving $1 for $1, or even you're working hard giving $1.10 for $1. Mm-hmm. Really killing it for your clients.
Right.
But okay, now you're getting sucked into substance use disorder. You're just a little over the line, right, in the continuum. Now you're giving 90 cents for $1. Get further towards the middle, moderate substance. Now it's 60 cents for $1. And maybe no one's noticed it yet. And what happens is we don't say, oh, okay, I'm not working hard. We keep, as the line of high functioning decreases, we keep kneeling to stay under it, to tell ourselves we are still kicking ass. And finally, it drops off a cliff, you malpractice, and by the time someone notices it, it's, you're really, it's a real problem. So I want to leave them to leave with, rock bottom is a misnomer. The goal is to catch it at the highest possible point. So how do we do that? Because we are often not the best judges of that when you're in the middle of that. Right. Then it comes on compassionate community, right? Compassionate community, the people that surround us, the colleagues that surround us, who are busy with their own lives. They see something, it's just going through a tough time. And that may be all it is. And so that's why we're reluctant to say something. Mm-hmm. And so it's what a colleague of mine coined, Terry Bentley Hill, not minding your own business. Yeah. If you see something, ask two questions. The first one is, how you doing? You doing okay? You seem a little struggling. And it may be situational. It may be just situational. You're not judge saying they have a substance use problem. Oh, you're an alcoholic. No, right. How are you doing?
It's a broad, open-ended question of just opening the door for them to speak to you.
And before that conversation breaks, say, oh, great. If you find, just so you know, if you want to talk, you can come to me.
Yeah.
Two questions. And what happens there, it starts in a continuum of mental health wellness where you may be the first person that's ever asked that question.
Yeah.
Right. And they may not be ready to, seek help. They may not be ready to utilize as the resources. You have to want to do it, right? Because you can't force somebody. And so, if the next person asks that, and the next person, all of a sudden it's this cumulative thought process, and maybe three people down the line where he or she or they or they say, I'm ready, and take advantage. Yes, I'd like to talk. But here's the kicker, Blake. Here's the kicker. It can't be performance art. The 2-ask rule, you got to mean it, because people know when you are not authentic.
Yep.
And then they will never come to you again.
Yep.
They will never come to you again. They will never trust you again if they think it's just, okay, I got to do this. I've done it. I feel good about it. It's about me. I feel good about myself. And I also say that the last quiver in the 2-ask rule is the 3-ask. If you're just sure, and you really, there are ethical issues involved. We'll assume we're not there where you have to say something to someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you really doing?
Right. Yeah. How are you really?
How are you really doing? That's the third question that don't mind your own business. And again, it's a whole other conversation, the ethics going on. If you see something that's malpractice or whatever, you have a duty to go. You have a duty to go to the firm or something because you're exposed. The firm could be exposed. Whole other conversation.
Right. You don't want to turn the other cheek because it could
But
also.
you can go to the lawyer's assistance program on the other level. And a lot of lawyers think it's not anonymous when it is.
Mm-hmm.
I've had very seasoned lawyers say to me, I don't call in my colleague because they'll know it's me. No, they won't.
No, they won't. Right.
No, they won't. They won't know it's you. And you're not a rat. You could be saving your colleague's life. You're taking care of the profession, right? Before that colleague malpractices, or even worse, that colleague wipes out a family on a highway.
How often are these lawyer assistant programs discussed? How often is that information dispersed?
They're discussed quite often. Lawyer assistants quite often. They go around, especially. The Texas Lawyer Assistance Program goes around to all the Texas law schools.
Right.
They come to state bar events. They go to local bar events. And it's the same with lawyers helping lawyers in Pennsylvania. They go to all the law schools. They go to law firms. So they'll, for the most part, they'll, do what they need to do to come in and to an event.
Is that how recent were these programs developed?
Oh man, it just depends on the state. I want to say Texas was about 1990, and somebody will correct me on that. Lawyers helping lawyers in Pennsylvania was the 80s, I'm sure.
Okay.
But I mean, New Jersey, New York, they all have very, New York has very stout state and local lawyers helping each other programs. New Jersey has it, Pennsylvania has it. So
Florida has it. We have the LAP, the Lawyer Assistance Program here.
Yeah, Florida has a very stout program. I've spoken in Florida several times, and they have theirs is called something different. The Lawyers Assistance Program,
it's LAP. Everybody calls it LAP down here.
Yeah. And so LAP, and so I've worked with them, and so they do very good work.
They do, and I think it would behoove a lot of attorneys to even just call for information, just to understand, especially if you're an owner of a law firm.
You don't have to call for information. They have LAP has a great website.
Well, sure, yeah. I guess that's an old school thing for me to say. But
they have a great website. You don't want people to recognize your voice.
It would be smart even to have owners of firms if they have even one attorney working for them or 200 attorneys working for them, have these programs come to their firms and just discuss the offerings.
You're right. And it's important because we even have the micro stigma within the profession. I know lawyers who refuse to go, especially in smaller communities. They refuse to go to 12-step because they're afraid someone there will be on a jury. All of a sudden someone on a jury will be in group with them and things like that. So they refuse. And for those people, I give them in the rooms or, something that's online where they don't, you try to give them, the online ones were, the next best option, but they just won't go.
Yeah. I know there's one near me, and I'm sure they're all over the place in every county, but there's also lawyers only.
There are also lawyers only. But in smaller jurisdictions, that's not an option.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of Texas small towns, a lot of Florida small counties, right?
Yeah. Obviously, I'm in Broward County, which is the second largest county.
In Dallas County, I mean, you have a lot of counties out in Midwest Texas and East Texas where you're not going to have that option. It's either AA, 12 steps, sorry, or you can do it online.
Yeah, online.
So that we have that problem as well. And it's funny. I was so worried about being known. I walked into the rooms, and half of the people in there were lawyers I knew. I was worried about it.
Well, and I'd be interested to hear. I'm sure you would confirm this, but the love and support that you receive from those peers is always surprising. We go in expecting to be shunned.
For the same reason I am.
Yeah. It's always nothing but love. I think it's the biggest fear is those first few steps into whether it's a treatment center, a program, or whether it's making that first phone call to a lawyer's assistance program. It's those first moments that are the scariest. But after you make those first steps, it get easier.
Yeah. I know we're probably running out of time, but I'll tell you the one area where the legal profession really lags. absolutely is just in almost the dark ages, although not everywhere, is harm reduction. Okay. It is an absolutely abstinence-based profession, in terms of health. And so, and now we really don't know how many lawyers struggle with cocaine use disorder, opioid use disorder, or things like that, because in the major studies, even in an anonymous study, say for cocaine, lawyers were so worried about admitting to illegal activity. Alcohol is not illegal. And so lawyers were so worried about admitting to illegal activity, even in an anonymous random study, that they wouldn't answer it. They couldn't get a clinically significant sample. So, but we can say is, and I think when Patrick Krill wrote the foreword to my book, he said we can assume the sample is larger than what we know, than what we saw in the study.
Yeah.
And so, a lawyer, I mean, I'm going to say this, I'm just going to speak off the top of my head and an anecdotal and an opinion. A lawyer's not going to go to his, and say, I'm on Suboxone or methadone.
No.
I mean, and getting someone to recommend that either, even the most well-meaning people helping people in the profession still, in my opinion. Now, some may push back and say that's not true. In my opinion, the most well-known, the biggest names, the most well-meaning people doing great work, just really have that abstinence mindset. And for the majority, that's great. But
for everybody,
we need to think about everybody.
Right. There needs to be options and different pathways to recovery, regardless of profession. And I think it's probably just a notion of ease. If let's just give them one model to go, especially a lot of the assistance programs. Let's give them one model to follow. If they follow our rules, then they can keep their license. And
and a lot of the places we send them are abstinence based.
Right.
The treatment centers, there's a lot of places we send them are abstinence based.
Sure.
And that's great, right? But we have to look at harm reduction, and even if the goal is to get to abstinence, okay, let's just say that's the goal versus we'll carve out the piece of, well, if I can function, if I can hit all the pillars of recovery, right, on we can use the SAMHSA definition of recovery, which I know some of the abstinence hawks hate. But if we look at what the pillars of recovery are, home, family, work, how am I functioning, children, if I can do that well on Suboxone and I'm doing fine, then that's recovery.
Yeah.
Or methadone. So we'll carve that piece out. We should at least be really putting out there that it's okay, even to the goal of abstinence. And I think people do that a lot more. We're doing better in that area.
Oh yeah, much better.
And I think we can do better with it in the legal profession.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I'm speaking in generalities because it's impossible for me to speak to all the different.
Without data, there's no way to know.
Right. But and this is another comment in generality. I do feel as if the law field, just based on personal experience of watching it unfold in my own house, is that it always seems maybe just a couple steps behind catching up to the rest of the workforce in terms of taking care of one's mental health and getting up.
Sure, but there's a reason for that, is because we have had so much stigma for so long, right? And the masthead, this is changing, and this is where we really have to look forward. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be studies in the future that, when I'm in my wheelchair, the masthead people are baby boomers.
Yeah.
Who grew up, and and I know there are Gen X and stuff, but even Gen X too, I'll throw them in there, grew up in the abstinence culture.
Yeah.
So that's what they know, and they push back. That is a generalization, but I think if any of them are looking at this, they'd agree with me. They push back against anything but abstinence. We have to die out. I know we have to die out, and we have to retire.
So that's what we're waiting for.
Yeah, we have to retire and let the more progressive minds come into play.
No, and listen, I mean, that's not just that's every field that exists. I mean, as certain generations move out of the workforce, the newer ones come in, they make the changes to culture. And that's what's
and it's an interesting evolution. First, we needed the wet bar behind the desk in the office generation to retire, right? Even a little older than me. Yeah, my day, I have a bar in my cabinet. We needed that. We needed that to move into retirement and change that culture. And now we're into the really just abstinence-minded culture that with nothing, and there's nothing else.
Right.
Abstinent. And abstinence is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing abstinence. I'm abstinent, but from alcohol and cocaine. But we just need more progressive minds to take hold.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very black and white model, and of course, that's not what people are. It's filled with color of every color that you can imagine, and we all come in different shapes, sizes, colors. It doesn't matter, and that's
it's great. It's great to round up all the square pegs in the square holes and get them, but there are others, and we need to be we need to be more inclusive. And I'll repeat the same phrase: more open-minded and willing to act on that open mind. It's one thing to say, yeah, I get it. Another thing to say, okay, let's walk the walk.
I completely agree. And I think we could do a lot of preaching to the choir here. And it just really comes to, in the end, it's about people opening up their mind and understanding that it's okay to receive help and that it's okay to struggle. It depends on what you do with that struggle, and help exists for you. And it's not something to feel ashamed of in seeking help.
That's an interest you say that. Because I tend to push back against the shame thing, and maybe it's just semantics, because someone says, "Oh, I feel so ashamed," and what I don't say is, "Well, you shouldn't." I say it's a normal feeling.
Well, I'm not saying
shame is normal.
I'm saying you shouldn't feel ashamed to get help.
No, absolutely. Well, you may feel ashamed to get help, but the question is, how do we push through that, right?
Okay. Yes, I see what you're saying.
Maybe it's just semantics, and it may be. But the question is, because shame to getting help is a normal human reaction. Mm-hmm. So I try not to invalidate it. Say, okay, I get it. How can we push through the shame?
Right. Okay. So let me rephrase. I agree with you. Let me rephrase. Don't let the shame prevent you from seeking.
Absolutely. Yes. How can we keep the shame from preventing you from taking that first step?
Yes.
And then the next and the next.
So work through that shame.
Yes.
All right. Well, before we go, I got one last question for you. I've been watching on Instagram and on LinkedIn. You do your singing for mental health.
Yes, I do. I have taken singings. I've always wanted to try it, and it stemmed from some childhood trauma. It's kind of funny. I grew up taking piano lessons. I wanted to be Billy Joel, the next Billy Joel, but I was never going to be Billy Joel, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to sing, but I was never going to be Billy Joel. But only Billy Joel can be Billy Joel. When I was in summer camp, it was this Jewish camp called Emma Kaufman Camp in Pennsylvania, and they had the talent show. And me and this other guy decided that we were going to go up on stage and sing "Let It Be." I think it was "Let It Be" by the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And he sang. I croaked. I was so scared, so shy. Blah, blah. And I ran off the stage with everyone laughing at me. And it was kind of falling off the horse, right? I never got back on. And so I decided I was going to address that little boy and learn how to sing. And it's been a journey, right? I've run a bunch of marathons, and I kind of akin it to marathon training. A lot of times it's just you don't see any improvement, and it's a slog. Then all of a sudden, ooh, a little bit and a little bit. And so, and it's a vulnerability thing, right? There was, for the first 6 months of my singing lessons, I wouldn't put it on. I just couldn't stand the sound of my voice. I had to get past being horrified at the sound of my voice. And I'm finally getting to a comfort level where I don't mind putting my voice out there. And now I'm going on, been taking them for over a year now. And I'm not Billy Joel, but I enjoy it.
And I know we got to jump, but to me, it's another sign of you stepping into vulnerability, of you publicizing this process of posting it on your social media.
Oh, I was horrified.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Take it down, post it, take it down.
And I'm speaking as somebody who wishes they could sing, and I would be terrified to post myself singing. So what I'm thinking is, why don't we exit the show singing Piano Man together?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I haven't warmed up. Okay, you ready? And now my voice is going to crack because I'm not warmed up.
I'll let this. Mine is going to be worse.
On a Saturday, the regular crowd shuffles in. There's an old man sitting next to me, making love to his tonic
engine. Bye, everybody.
Play me a memory. I'm not really sure how it goes, but it's sad and it's sweet, and I know it complete when I wore a younger man's clothes. There you go.